All right, I had technical difficulties. It appears that I've already done my work here. I already recorded the video, but for some reason it wasn't recording, so I kind of need to start over. So I already have notes that are written on my papers, but that's okay. I'll go through slowly and have you write over top of kind of what I'm already doing. So today we are adding and subtracting the standard algorithm. So we're looking at adding and subtracting, and we're connecting the models we used with standard algorithm. Please add today's date to it as well. All right, so let's look at what we did here. So I have 22 hundredths and I have 39 hundredths. So what I'm doing is I have 2 tenths. I'm going to shade in my 2 tenths. Now I have 39 hundredths, but I'm just focused on the tenths because I have to add my tenths together. 1, 2, 3 of those. Now I have to add my 2 hundredths. 2 of those. Now I have to add 9 of those. I can't fit them all in one spot. I can only fit 8, 9. So let's look at what we did over here. I noticed that I lined my numbers and decimals up. So I've lined them up into similar place values. My decimals are one on top of each other. Go ahead and write that part. I lined my decimals up. So let's see what happens when I have 2 plus 9. I get my 11. When I added 2 plus 9, I got a total of 11. But it looks like I have 1/100th. This turned into a tenth. I have 1/100th, and this turned into a tenth in my tenths column. So now when I add these all up, I get 6. So when I add these all together, it now appears I have 6 tenths and 1/100th. It doesn't matter that this last tenth was made up of hundredths. It now turns into a tenth. So what I did was I had to trade units for rods. I had to trade my units and turn it into a rod. All right, let's look at our next problem. I have 3 tenths. I have to shade in 3 tenths. Remember, I'm adding all my tenths together. 4 tenths. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I had 7 tenths. 1, 2, 3. I didn't fit enough into this first grid, so I have to spill over to my next. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now it's time for me to add my hundredths. I don't have any. I have 5, 5, and then I have 3. 1, 2, 3. So over here, I have some that fit into one grid and some that fit into another grid. So again, I lined my numbers up. I filled in my zeros to any empty spaces. Go ahead and write those notes. Add zeros to the empty spaces. So now let's go ahead and add. 5 plus 0 plus 3 is 8. 4 plus 3 is 7. 7 more is 14. I can't fit all of these rods into one spot. So I have to keep 4 in my extra box, and these 10 turned into a whole. Bring your decimal down. So I grouped my tenths together, remember, and I grouped my hundredths together. So let's recap these notes that we just did. So I have to line my numbers up in standard algorithm and my decimals, one on top of each other according to place value. And when I'm adding, I have to trade my units for a hundredth, just like I did over here. Over here, I have to group my tenths together and group my hundredths together. Just like over here, I group my hundredths together and I group my tenths together. Add zeros to empty spaces. Here's my next problem. Amanda makes a smoothie every day for breakfast. Her favorite smoothie uses 1 5/10 cups of yogurt and 3/10 cups of milk as the base. How many cups of ingredients does she use all together? So here are my numbers. Let's see what they did. First, they added their tenths. Then they added, first they added their hundredths. then they added their tenths, then they added their wholes. So let's review what we did up top. We lined our numbers up. Everything is filled in. I add zeros within to any empty spots. I added my tenths together, and I added my wholes together. Let's flip over and let's look at subtraction. This is where I got partway through and then realized my video was not recording. There was too many videos already on my iPad. It wouldn't let me do any more. So I have 1.5, 1.5. And I had to take away 63 hundredths. So what I did here is I had this spilled into two different grids, but it did not fit. So let's look at what they did down here. I added a 0 into my spot. So let's start subtracting. I can't do 0 minus 3. I can't take 3 extra units away because I don't have any extras. So I had to trade a tenth for 10 hundredths. Now I can do 10 minus 3 and I got 7. So I had 4 left. I had 4 left. I can't do 4 minus 6. I can't take 6 away from here because I only have 4. So I had to turn all of these into rods. So I took away from the whole and I turned the rods into 14. I'm sorry, I turned the tenth. I turned this flat into tenths. 14 minus 6 and I got 8. So I didn't have any left. So what did I do? I had to borrow from the place value to the left. I had to borrow from over here. Let's look at what happens when I just start with 1 and I take 72 hundredths away. So they started with their 1 whole and I had to take away 7 tenths. Then I had to take away 2 hundredths, but I didn't have any hundredths, so I had to borrow from a rod, get 2. Down here, I filled in with zeros because there wasn't anything there. If you don't fill in with zeros, you're going to end up with the wrong answer. You're not going to borrow and you're going to end up with 72 hundredths, and that's what you started with, and that's not the correct answer. So this time I didn't have any tenths to borrow from right away. I had to go all the way over to this whole. I had to turn all these into tenths. Then I had to turn the tenths into 9 tenths and 10 hundredths. So first I turned this into a 10, then I borrowed again. So now I have 10 and I took 2 away and I'm left with 8. Now I had only 7, 8, 9 because remember I borrowed 1. Now I can do 9 minus 7 to get 2 and I have 0. Now we're back to where I was before I realized the video was not recording. So we're on the same place now. Jack had 1 8/10 cups of baking soda to use to make his model volcanoes erupt for his science fair. He used 9/10 of a cup practicing at home. How much does he have left? There's my action word that told me I'm going to subtract. So this time I started with 1 8/10. I took away 9/10. So we started over here with 1 8/10. And they took away 9/10. 1, 1, 2, let me do this in highlighter. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It appears they went over the 1 mark and they had to go into the tenths. So let's look what they did. It didn't work. 8 minus 9 doesn't work. So I have to borrow and make this all tenths. So now I have 18 tenths is 9. But I've also noticed I have my numbers completely lined up. So these models that we've been doing are showing you why you should borrow and carry. So let's write that down. Models help us to see why we borrow and carry. So borrowing is when we subtract, carrying is when we add, when we have to group things together or we have to ungroup them. When we go past the whole and we have to turn them from wholes and tenths into all tenths. When we have to break up wholes and we have to borrow from them. That's the purpose for why we did all of these models. But you can always use them to add and subtract if they make more sense to you than the standard algorithm does.